A cloud of speculation has gathered over Nancy's fate, with theories multiplying as the days turn into weeks. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos provided a chilling glimpse into the investigation during his most recent public appearance. He alluded to a long-standing internal hypothesis, a piece of the puzzle he is currently unwilling to share. Several weeks ago, whispers emerged, suggesting the department was leaning toward a specific sequence of events. The unconfirmed working theory points toward a residential intrusion that spiraled into something far more sinister. Yet, that explanation feels hollow, lacking the weight of truth. Now, we have a significant development. February 1st, 2:28 in the morning, the final electronic heartbeat from Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker flickered out. 8 minutes later, a vehicle was captured on video 2.5 miles away, a distance typically covered in 6. Law enforcement has acknowledged the precision of this timeline. 65 days have passed, and the handcuffs remain unlocked. The individual who dropped Nancy off just hours before her disappearance has maintained a 65-day wall of silence. Authorities have now challenged reports from 4 major outlets regarding the suspect's prior history at Nancy's residence. We are not witnessing a standstill, but a disintegration. Within those jagged cracks, the real story is hidden. Tonight, we dissect the vehicle's path, the official search perimeter, and the anomalies that lie just beyond it. Evidence surfaced half a mile outside that zone. Intelligence experts suggest the jacket antenna points toward a coordinated 2-person hit. The bloodstains discovered at the entrance force a total reconsideration of that critical 41-minute window of time. 65 days of absolute quiet from the final person known to have seen Nancy Guthrie in the flesh. Behavioral science suggests this specific silence is rarely a symptom of genuine grief. Thank you for joining us. Whether you are watching from America, Britain, or any corner of the globe, from Canada to Australia, I ask you to pause and hold Nancy Guthrie in your thoughts and prayers. We look to a higher power that illuminates the shadows and answers the collective call of people across every border. Shield Nancy tonight, Father. Lead the detectives to the light. Prick the heart of anyone guarding the secrets this family so desperately needs. May Nancy return home. We remain steadfast, trusting in the unseen. Please type Amen if you are standing in solidarity with her loved ones. Share your location so we may see the global reach of this vigil. This bond reaches across every continent. Every single voice added to the chorus carries immense weight. Leave your insights or leads below. A single forgotten detail might be the key to the lock. We must now descend into the specifics. We begin with the vehicle, the pivot point that alters the entire narrative. The Strataglu residence is situated roughly 2.5 miles from Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills. Their property is located along Camino Royale. This secluded back road bypasses the main intersections, offering a stealthy exit from the Guthrie neighborhood toward the outskirts. Their camera logged 12 cars before dawn on February 1st. One specific vehicle emerged from the dark at 2:36. Nancy's pacemaker officially ceased its transmission at 2:28. A field reenactment of the drive between these 2 points clocked in at exactly 6 minutes. This path avoids major lighting and cameras, precisely the route a predator fleeing a scene would instinctively choose. 2:28. The signal dies. Nancy is severed from her connection to the world. Factor in a 6-minute transit through the shadows at a cautious speed. The vehicle should have arrived by 2:34. Instead, it surfaces at 2:36. A 2-minute gap exists in the timeline. That slight delay is consistent with a driver hesitating to scan their surroundings or check their rearview mirror. Perhaps they used that moment to discard a disguise or ensure no one was watching before accelerating into the night. Former NYPD detective Pat Broen and his team have conducted a forensic review of the available video. Their findings identify a Kia Soul, a compact, unassuming crossover that is as common as it is unremarkable. It is a ghost of a car designed to move through the suburbs at 2:30 without alerting a soul. For an operation demanding absolute anonymity, this vehicle represents a calculated, almost perfect tactical selection. Camino Royale is not a thoroughfare. The road feeds into East River, a secondary vein cutting through the northern edge of Tucson. At this junction, the 4 cardinal directions each offer a different, haunting possibility. Southward, the border sits 60 miles away in Rio Rico, the primary focus during the initial search weeks. To the west lies the Tucson-Marana corridor, while the north stretches toward the heights of Oro Valley. This was Tommaso Cioni's territory, and the home he shared with Annie. Eastward, the desert simply opens up. It is a landscape of dry washes and trailheads where a body could remain hidden for months. Expert analysis from former Lieutenant Michael Gould suggested Nancy's remains would likely be within 5 miles of home, 2 to 5 miles. The Strataglue camera was at 2.5. The glove, found at 2. The physical evidence is constricting within that specific radius, exposing a catastrophic failure in the police strategy. The FBI set their search zone at 2 miles. That camera was just 0.5 miles further ignored. The owners reached out only after seeing the news. No investigator had ever approached their property. No one requested the footage. Without their proactive choice to check the archives, this evidence would be lost forever. Individuals with deep insight into the criminal probe suggest a desperate rush to reach a conclusion occurred in the opening hours, with responders assuming Nancy had merely wandered off, treating a potential crime as a routine rescue mission. That fatal miscalculation explains why the search was so small and why crucial video sat unreviewed for 26 days. On February 27th, the sheriff finally acknowledged that the investigative focus was expanding to include vehicles much further from the initial scene. It took nearly a month before authorities realized their perimeter was far too narrow. Countless theories have emerged regarding Nancy's disappearance, each probing into the dark unknowns of the case. Interestingly, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos hinted at a private theory during a recent interview, though he refused to elaborate. Early rumors indicated the department believed they were looking at a specific motive, perhaps a burglary that went sideways, although this has never been officially substantiated. That hypothesis is difficult to accept. Why would a thief abduct Nancy Guthrie if the goal was mere theft? If a home invasion turned violent, the logical move for a criminal is flight, not taking a hostage. I have struggled to find a psychological bridge that makes that theory make sense. Furthermore, the evidence suggests this was not a random accident, but a premeditated and targeted abduction. While we cannot know every detail, we will now analyze the hard facts that have surfaced. The National Security Agency spent a year instructing federal agents on the mechanics of complex investigations, followed by 18 years of service as a state trooper and detective in local law enforcement. Those credentials offer a unique perspective, especially given your recent time on the ground in Tucson. To be clear, my expertise was in digital and internet-based probes, not internal affairs. There is a very different psychological profile required for internet crimes compared to internal policing. I was never in internal affairs, for any officers listening. You were in Tucson recently, correct? I arrived just as the search warrants were being served, right in the heart of the activity. It was roughly 2 weeks into the case. I was there with another network, observing. Being present is vital. It changes your entire understanding of the investigative process. Reporting from a distance is impossible here. Effective insight requires being physically close to the evidence. Other outlets were citing those reports because they were born from being in the thick of it. You were on the ground, gathering data that maps and screens could never truly convey. Without understanding the specific rhythm of the local community, or the unforgiving nature of that desert terrain, the reporting lacks its necessary psychological weight. True investigative work requires standing on the very ground where the events occurred. That includes the border crossing, illustrating how easily someone could vanish into the southern horizon. Exactly. Unless you have physically navigated that terrain, it is impossible to grasp how isolated and distinct the environment surrounding her home truly is. I would like to begin by addressing the sheriff's recent statements. He claims to have a specific theory regarding the disappearance, yet he remains remarkably secretive about the details. Consider this carefully. You have been immersed in the forensics of this case since the first day, even traveling to Tucson to analyze the local geography firsthand. What is your current analytical framework? Speculation among the public varies from a botched home invasion to a targeted abduction, or perhaps a predator stalking her every move. When you strip away the noise, what is your definitive perspective on what actually transpired? On my platform, I guide people through a retrospective analysis. I do not deal in fixed theories. I operate solely on the basis of rigorously tested hypotheses. There is a crucial distinction there. We have both seen how easily a preliminary idea can harden into a dangerous bias during major investigations. In high-profile crimes, a theory often transforms into an assumed fact, and that assumed fact eventually dictates a rigid, potentially incorrect narrative. I can point to one of the most significant intelligence failures in recent history as a perfect example of this phenomenon. I was stationed in the capital region during the 9/11 attacks and the sniper crisis. At that time, the official narrative focused exclusively on a white box truck. They were completely mistaken. Their tunnel vision was a disaster. The actual vehicle involved was a blue Chevrolet Caprice. I scrutinized every possibility. While the authorities claim to have a theory, they are likely confusing a basic suspicion with a formal, evidence-based hypothesis. Their terminology lacks precision. My own perspective, which I detailed in an early investigative report, is far more focused. After years spent profiling missing persons, violent abductions, and cold-blooded homicides, the evidence here points in a very specific direction. When you dissect the mechanics of this event, it can only be one of two chilling possibilities. This was either a property crime that spiraled into chaos, or the burglary was never the primary objective to begin with. If we assume a botched robbery, we must ask what specific psychological factors within that house compelled a thief to escalate to a kidnapping. Why would a criminal decide that taking a human life was less risky than simply fleeing the scene empty-handed? That is the missing piece of the puzzle, the story told by the crime scene itself, which we are both desperate to analyze. We need to see the exact state of that bedroom. What was the geometry of the disarray when the first responders arrived? Did the state of the bedding suggest she rose of her own accord? Or was there evidence that she was forcibly dragged away? That distinction identifies whether there was a confrontation in the room or a forced exit. Ultimately, it distills down to one grim reality. Over time, I have had to voice the most uncomfortable truths. I recall discussing these very points during our previous briefings with other investigators. There comes a psychological threshold where you must accept that this is no longer a search for a missing person. We are looking at an 84-year-old woman with a compromised heart, violently confronted at 2 a.m. inside her own sanctuary. The presence of blood confirms a brutal struggle. Arguments about her use of blood-thinning medication are irrelevant. The fact remains that violence occurred. She was forcibly removed from her residence. By any definition, that constitutes a violent, life-threatening encounter. While many continue to hold out hope for her safe return, my investigative instincts are rooted in a much harsher pragmatism. Successful profiling requires you to separate emotion from logic. You have to compartmentalize the horror to see the patterns clearly. My stance is uncompromising. This investigation must be reclassified as a no-body homicide. That shift changes the public's perception and dictates a more aggressive search strategy. An expert in clandestine operations recently examined the doorbell footage and identified a distinct antenna protruding from the suspect's clothing. This leaves us with two likely scenarios: the use of a short-range radio or a sophisticated signal jamming device. The radio hypothesis is far more significant because of what it reveals about the professional architecture of the crime. A walkie-talkie is a tactical ghost. It operates on frequencies that do not generate cell tower logs or digital records. It bypasses Wi-Fi networks entirely. It leaves none of the electronic breadcrumbs that a standard mobile phone would leave behind. If the intruder was communicating with an accomplice, someone waiting nearby for the signal to move, they used a method designed for invisibility. While federal agents perform tower dumps to find digital signals, a radio user remains completely off the grid and undetected. The expert assessment was chillingly blunt. A getaway driver is a critical component of this operation, suggesting the involvement of a secondary suspect. A radio would be the preferred tool to coordinate a vehicle pickup without creating a permanent record for investigators to find. When you apply this logic to the timeline, a terrifyingly organized framework begins to emerge. An architect provided the intelligence on her routine and security, while an operative executed the physical breach seen on the camera. Somewhere nearby, a driver waited on a secluded road like Camino Royale, ready to vanish the moment the signal was given, awaiting the cue. At 2:28, the pulse ceases. The connection vanishes. The vehicle glides toward the extraction point. By 2:36, it is 2.5 miles away, fleeing the scene. Frequency interference explains the camera failure before the intruder was spotted. That electronic blackout was a calculated strike. The entire operation was engineered to leave no digital footprint. Tell us your thoughts. Observation 1. Intelligence veteran Tracy Walder spotted an antenna on the jacket, either a radio or a signal jammer. Using a handheld radio ensures no cellular records are ever created. A hidden accomplice in a getaway car communicating through channels that leave zero trace. Does that factor change your view of how sophisticated this plot truly was? Comment below. Brian Koberger severed his connection before driving toward the house in Moscow, Idaho. He assumed killing the signal erased the trail. He failed to consider the weight of the silence. Detectives mapped the void. His device was active before midnight, then again after 4 in the morning. That 3-hour vacuum, mirrored by tower data along his route, became the spine of the prosecution. The absence itself became the evidence. Forensic expert Heather Barnhart, an analyst of phone data in this case, suggests this period of darkness is the definitive clue. Your smartphone acts as a mute witness to every secret of your life. If anyone involved deactivated their devices between midnight and 4 on February 1st, that hush is already archived. The power lies not just in February 1st, but in who appeared across multiple dates. Federal agents identified January 11th and 24th as windows of extreme investigative interest. Any piece of hardware that went dark on all 3 specific nights in the Catalina foothills during the surveillance of the victim's residence is no mere coincidence. It constitutes a unique behavioral fingerprint. Innocent people do not systematically kill their signals at midnight and revive them at dawn during a stakeout. Barnhart highlighted a critical detail that has largely escaped public attention. A device might have brushed against the home network even without logging in, simply by being nearby. Internal logs could reveal ghost devices hovering around the property on those specific nights. If a device linked to anyone in this circle was caught near that wireless network, on January 11th, 24th, or February 1st, that data is sitting on a server right now. Stains found on the threshold and exterior wall were genetically confirmed as belonging to the victim. No interior violence was reported. That placement tells a story of a fatal reconstruction. If the struggle occurred at the entryway, she likely opened the door herself to a familiar face. She might have stepped into the night under a false sense of security. An 84-year-old doesn't open her door at 2 in the morning for a masked stranger. She opens for trust. Annie sent me. Tommaso asked me to check on you. These are the words that lure a woman in her nightgown to unbolt her door. In the dead of night, trusting the speaker is connected to those she loves most. Investigator Johnny Grussing's vendetta theory matches the bloodshed at the threshold, rather than inside the residence. Law enforcement analyst John Miller offered a statement a month later that reframes this entire investigation. He noted that regardless of the original intent, the situation spiraled into chaos almost instantly. A transgression that shifted categories the moment it was executed. A mission that fractured at the front door, turning from one plan into a desperate alternative. Consider the cryptocurrency wallet. It has been frozen since its inception. 0 transactions. The federal bait remains untouched. Had money been the motive, the funds would have been laundered days ago. That digital stillness is the silence of a mere prop. A false narrative manufactured after the fact to lead investigators toward a non-existent financial motive. When the Bureau made the security footage public, to the watchful public, Dominic Evans appeared as a near-perfect physical match for the primary person of interest. Evans serves as a musician, alongside Tommaso Cioni within the Tucson-based Americana ensemble known as Early Black. He is an educator at a local school, possessing an athletic frame, prominent facial hair, and deep roots in the Tucson community. He shares a creative bond, a hometown, and years of close history with the individual whose vehicle delivered Nancy Guthrie to her residence on that final evening. Shortly after his name surfaced, Evans gave a statement to the New York Times, confirming he underwent a 40-minute interrogation by federal and local agents. He maintained that he remained at home with his loved ones during the hours Nancy went missing. He described the ordeal as if his very identity had been hijacked, though he remains uncharged and is not officially classified as a suspect. While he chose to speak, Tommaso has retreated into a wall of silence for 65 consecutive days. In a vulnerable conversation with Hoda Kotb, Savannah Guthrie admitted her haunting fear that her own public stature may have made her mother a target. She confessed the psychological weight is crushing, fearing that her own life somehow invited this darkness into her mother's private world. While Savannah sought answers publicly, another individual cooperated fully, allowing investigators to process her home and take her vehicle into custody. Cameron faced the cameras directly, yet Tommaso has offered nothing but an empty, echoing void. The principles of behavioral science are cold and clear. In abduction cases, innocent relatives are typically vocal, visible, and desperate for progress. Their frantic need to assist often results in unintentional errors, yet insiders reveal that the trail has gone cold, with no named person of interest. At this hour, there is quite literally no one being officially scrutinized by the state. This leaves investigators to wonder if the perpetrator is miraculously lucky or possesses a level of cunning rarely seen in modern criminal cases. The chasm between the man who provides answers and the man who stays silent marks the divide between transparency and self-preservation. It is the difference between a cry for help and a calculated realization that every spoken word carries a lethal legal weight. A source with deep access to the Pima County Sheriff's Department suggests that catastrophic errors were made almost the moment Nancy was reported gone. Responding officers were quick to assume the elderly woman had simply wandered away from her own property. This narrow perspective framed the entire operation as a search and rescue mission rather than a criminal investigation. That premature conclusion poisoned the well, forcing the subsequent investigation to struggle under the weight of a flawed initial judgment. Detectives moved forward under the belief she was just a lost senior, treating a potential kidnapping like a routine missing person call. Crucially, the supervisor who took command of the scene had never once overseen a homicide investigation before being put in charge. Information provided to the press further indicates that the necessity for detectives to revisit the Guthrie home multiple times suggests the perimeter was never properly secured from the beginning. To return not just once, but repeatedly, is a clear admission that the site should have been treated with far more gravity at the outset. This was a fundamental breakdown occurring at the very threshold of the mystery. From the wrong classification to an insufficient search radius, the early hours were defined by a series of cascading failures. A 26-day delay in widening the search did not happen by chance. It happened in a unit led by someone with zero experience in violent crime. It was a climate where seasoned investigators were reportedly pushed aside in favor of a broken hierarchy. The internal command structure was already splintering long before the nation's most high-profile kidnapping landed on their doorstep. As of this moment, Nancy Guthrie remains lost to the shadows, and the search continues without a resolution in sight. 65 days have passed without an arrest or a named suspect, leaving insiders to admit that the investigation currently has no target. The fractures in this case go deeper than the evidence. They are embedded in the very institution tasked with bringing her home. A vehicle was spotted at 2:36 a.m. on a desolate road, just half a mile beyond where the search team stopped looking. A sophisticated two-person operation, a hidden antenna, and a digital blackout that chillingly echoes the methods used by Brian Kohberger. In this dark puzzle, the absence of activity has become the most damning piece of evidence. Blood found at the entry point rewrites the entire story, exposing the ransom notes as nothing more than a calculated theatrical distraction. The department misread the room in the first critical hours and has been desperately trying to catch up with a ghost ever since. 65 days of total silence from an individual whose behavior, under this intense scrutiny, does not align with the standard profile of innocence. This case isn't just stalling, it is cracking open, and it is within those cracks that the truth is hidden. Nancy Guthrie is still out there. She is 84 years old, and her life depends on her daily heart medication. If you know anything, contact 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit tips.fbi.gov. The family has offered over $1 million. The FBI is offering an additional $100,000. All tips are anonymous, and no personal identification is required. Honor Nancy's legacy in the comments, and share which corner of the globe you are joining us from tonight. May protection surround your family and your elders daily. This haunting investigation is far from over. We will return for every confirmed update. Stay close to the case. When the truth finally emerges, you cannot afford to hear it 2 weeks after the rest of the world.